Welcome to the 340Banter podcast. Today, Chelsea and I are joined by Chris Christian from FQHC 340B Compliance, as well as Richard Cox, the Director of Pharmacy Services at Hope Family Health. We will be discussing Hope's recent HRSA audit and what to expect if you get that letter saying you have an audit upcoming.
All right, HRSA audits, the letter that everybody is terrified to receive, but it's not an if, it's a when. Richard, I know you had a HRSA audit rather recently. We're hoping today you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that experience. And I know Chris went through that process with you, so looking for kind of timely experience, what it was like to, maybe let's start with what it was like to get that email or get that letter.
Well, like you said, it's, you always dread getting that response or getting that letter, that notification that you've got a HRSA audit coming. And it was no different for us. We kind of almost pressed the panic button when we first got it, but reached out to Chris and y'all's team to help kind of navigate that, and got through it in January, and very thankful it's over. But it was a good experience. It was a very good learning experience to get to go through that. And now that it's passed, I'm thankful we went through it. So
it was probably a little easier knowing that you already had consultants that you were working with, so you had somebody to reach out to right away.
For sure, people that had experience with going through that process and everything, and understanding what the data elements that they're looking for, and the all the different requirements, and be able to bounce things off of too. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, Jengus from Apexis always calls it the congratulations letter, even though it doesn't ever feel like that. It's always panic-inducing.
Yes.
So thinking about kind of things that I know you said it was nice because you could reach out and have Chris hop in and help guide you through the process. I know that you guys do a lot of work on being proactively ready for HRSA audits. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, before we get into the experience itself, kind of what you were really glad when you were preparing. You're like, oh, I'm so glad we put this process in place, or we've already got this documentation together.
Right. To me, it all goes back to when you're setting up your program. I mean, having that kind of in your mind, how you want to be able to sleep at night after you get those audit notices, and being able to have confidence in your processes, and being able to know for sure that you've got the documentation you need, or can at least put your hands on it and find it, and get the information that you need for an audit. So it all goes back to program setup, and then having a good partner or good people to help navigate the things you're not really familiar with. So
I like that kind of approach, that you're preparing as you set up your program. Thinking I'm preparing for my HRSA audit long before you get it.
Right.
That way, when it comes, it's still going to cause a little bit of a heart rate and going up, and it's not comfortable, but you're going to feel a lot better about it and not as scared there in the moment.
Right.
And I know I when we had Jengus from Apexis here, we asked him what his favorite Apexis resource or tool was, and he said that so much of their team would answer the same way, and it's that data request list tool, where so that people can build that into their 340B program ahead of time and plan around it. I think that aligns pretty well too.
Yeah, it's a great way to just prepare your program, because you know what they're going to ask. So going through your program, making sure you're prepared and have all those different the different groups at your health center, because it's not just pharmacy,
Right.
Ready to go.
Chris, I know you've helped a lot of organizations through HRSA audits. What do you see as maybe the most common element that's part of that data request list that organizations haven't thought of ahead of time, or maybe have more trouble, pulling or getting access to when that letter comes?
I think the hardest part is probably all of the purchasing documentation. Sometimes they won't know about all the wholesaler accounts that they have, or they'll just have trouble getting access to the invoices and the purchasing history. Of course, we love the Apexis PVP portal and being able to pull a historical purchase report from there. But sometimes it doesn't have everything that you need or are looking for on it. So then you've got to figure out how to get the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that leads nicely into, you get your HRSA audit notice, and then you have to go through the data request list. And a lot of that is pulling data and reviewing it and making sure that what you're going to provide to HRSA or OPA is what they're requesting. Not sending extra data, not leaving anything out. Talk us through kind of what that process looked like for you, Richard, but also what you think about or what you make sure you're doing with each client, helping them through their HRSA audit, Chris.
For us, it was like Chris said, the Apexis tool being able to get a lot of our purchases, but then there were some accounts, not 340B accounts, but we had a lot of other accounts that I didn't know beforehand that were set up for different wholesalers. But thankfully, none of those were 340B accounts, but still needed to be aware of those. And then just being able to get that information that was needed, and Chris was able to provide a good list, and you can maybe look here to find this information, or give some pointers on where to look for different information that they were looking for. So,
Did you have any trouble with talking to different people in your health center, getting responses from maybe credentialing or billing for those other elements? I'm more thinking the people that aren't every day in
Right.
340B.
Right. Not really troubled. They were very responsive. But it is mainly pharmacy that deals in it all the time. But like credentialing, we didn't have any trouble getting information. It was just kind of fine tuning the process of how, the steps we go through, like getting some information for our TPAs and things like that was more kind of the obstacle and the learning experience that it gave us.
I can echo that. The rest of his team was very responsive and easy to work with, so it was really good.
I think that's a testament to how you've prepared your program, because that's not always the case. I know Chris would agree that sometimes it's hard to get all those team members at the covered entity working together. So I think it's always a good idea that's another benefit to that data request list, is that you know who you need to pull in. So when you do a mock audit, bring those people in and let them actually be part of the process.
Right.
Now, those individuals that you had to pull in for the audit, are they part of your 340B oversight committee? Like, do you have them involved regularly already, or kind of just periodic touch base ad hoc when you need to?
We do. We set the compliance and risk committee kind of as for 340B oversight, and most of those individuals are on that committee. So they're, at a high level familiar with the 340B program and the importance it is for our health center, but they knew the importance of the HRSA audit too, and being able to be responsive to any requests that we made. So
That's good. I'm going to bring us back to the like reports, the data for a moment, just because I know that can be the most time consuming in preparing for an audit, and maybe talking through some of the, data validation, or I don't want to say like scrubbing or cleaning the data, because it's not that you're looking to remove anything inappropriately, but things that, like non-covered outpatient drugs, you don't want in your purchasing and utilization data and things like that. So talk us through kind of some of the things that you look through and work through when going through the data to make sure that, again, what you're providing to HRSA and OPA is what they need.
Yeah, so you specifically, of course, have to provide your 340B utilizations and purchases. And sometimes it's a little hard to get to that specifically, and to get the health center to understand that you only need 340B, especially when it comes to purchasing, because purchasing is even more convoluted because you have to provide them with a list of all of your accounts, the retail and the 340B, and an invoice from all of the accounts. But then when you go to the purchases, you only need to provide the 340B purchases. So sometimes that's a little bit hard to figure out and to get with the entity on.
I've had at least one instance, I might have more than one, where I've gone through this process and we found out that like someone in the clinic somewhere had needed a drug at some point in time without knowing it, set up another account, another purchasing account, happened to sign up for a 340B account. They don't know how they did it. No one else knows how they did it, but it has existed and nobody knew. And like that was a big surprise in HRSA audit prep, and one that you can't go back in time. Like nobody has a time machine. You have to work with that information moving forward and be transparent with it. But I know that that's come up from time to time as well.
And for the utilizations, like you said, you have to work on pulling out all the non-covered outpatient drugs. So like the diabetic testing supplies, filter out the reversals if those are included in the data.
I know some TPAs, really knowing your TPA's reports or being able to understand and navigate your TPA's reports is really important, because there are some that take the reversals out. There are some that have them as separate line items. There are some that keep them as a single line item, and being able to know what you're looking at. And if you remove those reversals, great. But then also communicating that in the narrative you have around your data prep. Yes, we've removed all the reversals so that the auditor knows what they're looking at as well.
Yeah. And the ones where it's the 2 line items, those are a little more complicated because you have to remove the reversal and the original claim.
Yeah. And I think you were talking about the purchase reports. I think a challenge for some covered entities, if they're not working with someone, identifying those non-covered outpatient drugs, because they may be purchased on the 340B account, but they're not technically 340B items.
And they're not purchased, on 340B contract.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got vaccines, those diabetic testing supplies, and so being able to identify those, I think, is sometimes challenging.
All right. So if we move past our prep phase and into the audit itself, I'll say the on-site audit, but knowing full well that it could be remote as well. Kind of talk us through what that experience was like, kind of going into it, going through the day, maybe what surprised you, what was as expected, but still perhaps stressful.
And maybe before we get there, we talk about the data, the claims list that we get a few days before.
I apologize.
That's a new change.
I skipped over that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So previously we didn't get you wouldn't get your claims that they would be testing till the day of the audit. And now we're after COVID and the change to virtual. Now even if it's on site, they send it to us, 3 days before?
3 days before.
3 days before the audit. So it gives you the opportunity to test those claims. So talk to us a little bit about what that was like and what you did in those 3 days to get ready.
I mean, that was very helpful. I mean, knowing what claims they were going to be looking at. Me and a coworker of mine, we got that information, and I think Chris had worked on it and kind of given us some ideas of where to look at in the EMR. And we just sat down the day before the audit and went through that data request and kind of practiced like we were sitting there speaking to the auditor and trying to, make sure we understood what we were relaying to the auditor and where to find it in the EMR and just the different data elements. And that was very, very helpful in our preparation.
That's one of the things that we try to do beforehand. Once we get the list, we go ahead and audit all of the claims, go through and make notes on what visit it is that you're going to want to look at to find the med documented, put all of that into an Excel spreadsheet. Go ahead and request the hard copy prescription, because that's going to have to be turned in beforehand. And then, like Richard said, walk through it as the team who's going to be doing the audit.
I know it can make like the day of much less stressful because you've already had a dry run, so to speak. But I think it's also more convenient for the auditor this way, because you're not looking through the chart in real time trying to find the documentation, particularly for, refilled medications or referrals where the documentation's in the chart, but you might have to click through a couple different notes or look in a couple different places for the information, and that's not bad. That's how medical care documentation is, but being able to go directly to the documentation that supports the responsibility of care for that drug utilization or prescription is really convenient for, I think, both parties to have a smooth audit day experience.
I feel like it really, the auditor was really thankful for that, that preparation and being able to smoothly go through the chart and find the information that they needed to see. So,
and I think it helps because you're going to feel nervous no matter what, but that gives you one less thing to feel nervous about. You know where it's at, and confidence isn't a bad thing because it's going to show that you trust this data. And when you're going into with an auditor, that's a good thing, to be able to be confident about running your chart and knowing where things are.
The other thing it helps with getting that beforehand is you have to provide credentialing documents for all the providers that are included in the sample list. So you also can go ahead and pull all of that together and upload it beforehand. And being able to upload the hard copies and the credentialing information beforehand is one less thing that you have to worry about on the day of the audit or the day after the audit, depending on your auditor, because you're not done until you've uploaded all the documentation. So
one of the other things that I've found helpful, less so from a health center's perspective, but more from a hospital perspective, wow, that's a hard word for me today, perspective, is around like order sets in the hospital. So, being able to find the actual order or for a drug that was administered might not be, singled out in a way that some drugs might be, but being able to kind of research and get the data ahead of time for that order set. Or if there are collaborative practice agreements, I've been in audits where a pharmacist, prescribed the medication and we needed to pull the collaborative practice agreements signed for the audit, but being able to do all of that work before the day of the audit so that you have everything kind of ready to go for the auditor to tell the story that goes along with that claim is much easier and much less stressful than having to, in the day of the audit, have 5 people that you're sending out requests to, hey, can you hunt this down for me?
So now that I took us off the rails, I guess getting back to the day of the audit, tell us about like what that experience was, anything that you were surprised by, or kind of how that went.
Myself, I can't really think of a whole lot of much as far as surprises, but it just, we had an initial an opening meeting that we sat down with the auditor, and several key people were present at that meeting, and she just kind of overviewed the day, and then we took a brief tour of the facility that our main facility, and spending most of the time in the pharmacy, and just kind of getting an idea of the workflow, how the workflow goes, and learned a little bit more about our pharmacy management system, and just kind of looking at things like that. And then we went back and worked through the audit samples, and got through all of those, and then finished up for the day fairly quick.
I think that was one of the fastest audits that I've done. We were done in like half a day.
Yeah. We're thankful for all the prep work that we were able to do beforehand.
You mentioned the visits. I think it's important for people to know they will visit your clinic, go into your med room and ask questions if you're using 340B meds in your for your clinic administered drugs. If you have an entity-owned pharmacy, they're going to go ask questions of your staff. So it's just important you know that. And I have been in one audit where they actually visited a contract pharmacy. That was an odd situation. It doesn't normally happen. And a lot of times your contract pharmacy partners, they don't understand the program because it's being done through the TPA. They don't have any direct hands in it. But we visited a independent pharmacy, and they just introduced themselves, asked a few questions about the pharmacy, and then wanted to see the DEA license to see if it matched what was in OPACE. But very short visit, but
Interesting, because OPACE for contract pharmacies should update from the DEA database.
Yep. Yeah, it was kind of odd, but it worked out. We had a good situation there, but that is a possibility that your auditor might want to do.
Yeah, I've had it on the agenda for a couple of the audits that I've done, but they didn't actually go visit it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually a little happy about it because I was curious how it would end up going, like you're saying. So
Yeah, there wasn't much to ask, and I think that's the least scary of any of the visits.
Thankfully, they didn't request that for our visit.
So this being kind of one of the quickest or smoothest audits that you've supported, can you think of things from other audits, recent audits, that might have gone kind of less smoothly or surprised you more on the day of the audit?
yeah, so one of the more recent audits that we did, we were having trouble matching the utilizations to the claims on the day, or the purchases to the claims on the day of the audit. And we needed a report from the TPA. And it took several hours to get the report from the TPA. And the auditor did not want to close out the audit until we had the report. So we had literally finished everything else for the audit. And we're just sitting there kind of awkwardly waiting on this report from the TPA. So that was interesting.
That's fun.
So to me, that tells me the more communication you have with your TPA prior, and ultimately, if they can assign someone to be available, that's even better. But it does get tricky with that. I know you've mentioned things like the AO and PC listings have been, we've seen some interesting things with phone numbers and stuff like that.
Yeah, they'll sometimes the auditor will call the phone number that's on OPACE, and they want to know that it is going to go directly to the person that is listed there. And so if it's like the generic health center number and you're going to have to be transferred to the person, they don't necessarily like that. They want to be able to get directly to the listed contact.
I've also seen them request like the business cards of the AO and PC and match those up with OPACE.
Yeah, that one was odd when I heard that. And so I think you really need to be sensitive that you keep that updated. So like if you use an extension, make sure you're keeping that up to date. If you change extensions at the office, that you update OPACE.
We'll say one of the good things they think that came out of COVID, when they switched to all remote audits, was that we had the audits, virtually through a platform. So you're sharing your screen. And a lot of the auditors, were able to see the medical record and things more clearly on their screen, because typically you're in a large conference room with the screen projected, and projecting an EMR screen on a wall or on a pull-down screen. You can see the general location, but sometimes the quality of the image you're looking at isn't great. So I actually have seen, even in person, the audits, a virtual meeting being set up and shared with the auditor, so that if they want to also have it on their screen, they can have that as well, and be able to see, more detail or more clarity, as opposed to just having it projected up on the wall. And I've seen that help, make for a more smooth audit in person, even though it's something that came out of those virtual remote audits.
And I would say with that, it's a great thing, but don't be afraid to take your screen down when you're looking for, in between what you're looking for, because it's okay to not show them everything in the chart. And so what I would recommend is just stop the share until you find the next thing and then share it again.
We've had like additional monitors available if they did want something closer that they can just plug like a second monitor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then just be able to drag over what you want to show. It's helpful as well.
Yeah, having a space big enough is important, because you're going to have several people in the room, and you don't want to be in an office where you're not able to see things very well.
I also highly recommend caffeine, water, and snacks.
Yes.
Because I'm not a nice person when I'm hangry. And I doubt other people are either.
But don't be offended if the auditor does not.
Yeah, if the auditor does not, but you have to make it through the day.
Yep. Your team needs it. Your auditor may or may not accept it if you provide it, but they're grateful even if they don't accept it.
Making it through the audit itself. I know you have not heard back the findings or the result of your audit yet, which is not uncommon for that to take some time. But let's kind of talk through the process of what happens after the audit, after you wait for, 6 months, waiting for any day the letter to come through and, cause more chaos in your life.
Yeah, so you are, of course, waiting on that letter. You're hoping that it is not going to have findings in it, just areas for improvement or AFIs. But if there are findings, then you've got to work through those. You may want to contest the findings and see if you can get them removed or at least reduced.
I know that's pretty common with duplicate discount findings where in practice, the entity was doing whatever the state requires to prevent a duplicate discount, so assigning modifiers or something like that. But maybe the Medicaid exclusion file wasn't up to date, so getting a duplicate discount finding kind of de-escalated to a Medicaid exclusion file accuracy finding.
Yeah, we just had that happen on one of our audits, actually. And then if you do have findings and they stand, then you have to work through your corrective action plan to remedy any of the issues that came up and submit your corrective action plan and then wait again to see if HRSA approves the corrective action plan.
Does that take as long after submitting that?
It varies also. Sometimes it can be several months.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get worried when that time frame is really long, but in practice, it doesn't mean anything.
It's not like the folks that have clean audits get a letter back right away, and then those that get it back 6 months later have findings. I think, what did you tell me? The 29
Yeah, I think that
staff
there
members?
are approximately 29 staff members at the Office of Pharmacy Affairs, and the generally your audits are done by Bazell. They're not done by a HRSA employee. It can be done, but the Bazell auditor doesn't make any decisions. They're just there to document the information. Then it goes to someone at OPA to make those decisions, and there aren't very many employees there.
And those are the same people that are, involved in gathering the information for the 87 lawsuits that are going on and so many other things. So it's that delay is not indicative of what the outcome of the audit results are.
Yeah, we had one that took around 6 months to come back, and it was no findings, a couple of AFIs. So
yeah, that's
really
great.
good.
So I think that waiting is always hard, and probably one of the hardest things, but try the best you can just to forget it until it comes back. And then just because you might have findings doesn't mean you can't do a corrective action plan that fully makes you compliant again.
I think that the exception to, pretend it didn't happen or forget it, is if you go through the audit and there's a finding. So, maybe you've got a contract pharmacy that should have been removed, or you had a Medicaid billing number or NPI that should have been added to the Medicaid exclusion file that wasn't there. You can work on those corrective action pieces in the meantime, even though you haven't gotten the results back yet, because you still want to continue to move forward to improve your program. And many times when covered entities get those letters back with the findings, they have the easiest corrective action plans to write because they say, since this time, we have corrected OPACE to reflect this, or we've corrected the Medicaid exclusion file to reflect this. So it's a little bit easier when and if that time comes. If you go through the audit and know, this came up, we know that we're going to get dinged on this, but it's a relatively easy fix, or it's not easy, and we got to get the billing department together to sort out how we're billing Medicaid. But you can start that process now instead of 6 months down the road.
Yeah, and if it involves a repayment, or if you do it earlier, you may be able to reprocess instead of repay. So the quicker you can get those steps in place. Not that we think there are any findings on yours, but sometimes you do know those happen, and you know you're going to get a finding. I went through one. I knew there was going to be a finding. It was a repayment of, I think, 35 cents. But we just went ahead and got it done early, and then when the finding came, it was a really easy corrective action to write.
With that, any final words of wisdom from the two of you to folks who have gotten their HRSA audit notice or congratulations letter, as Jangus likes to say, or that, haven't received one but are trying to make sure that they are in that ever ready state for when the day comes?
I mean, from my perspective, I would just say, just have that in mind when you're setting up your program, and have good partnerships with other people that have experienced it, so you can confidently know or feel like you're confident going into it. And just the prep work beforehand is very very important to have all that done before going into the audit day, from my perspective. So
Yeah, I think I would agree. You got to make sure you're doing everything well from the beginning. Going through the data request list just to make sure you've got everything set up. There may be pieces of the policies and procedures that's on the data request list that you don't currently have in your PMP. So
We didn't even talk about that, but that rush to update PMPs can be dicey.
Yep. So just making sure you've got everything as up to date as you can, and are working with everyone on your team.
Yep.
I think having a thorough annual audit is a great way to check the health of your program.
And we had just gone through one just a few months before, so that also helped us, in a lot of the data that we needed. So we already had a lot of that information pulled in a central location. So,
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. Really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
thank you for having us.